Hello, hello. Everybody here? Anybody here? Got half breed, kingfisher, armored sweatpants. You guys see me? You guys hear me? Somebody better answer. Okay, yeah, right. No. I think that was a sarcasm remark. Hello, hello. All right, well, I'll bring Alex in anyway. We'll go from there. What's up, man?
Hey, I see we got some people already.
Yeah, but nobody's answering me. I'm making sure so everybody can hear and see me. I like to. Okay. Sweatpants. Thank you,
Yeah,
Lord
Sweatpants is there.
Sweatpants.
He says he can.
All right.
How's
So I
everybody doing?
know I'm doing all right. I don't know about everybody
Yeah,
else. What they got? Oh, sweatpants saying Happy Easter. They're all about Easter, I guess. Hello, we can
yeah.
see you. All right. Yeah,
Kingfisher. All
yeah,
right,
we're
so
off.
hopefully y'all, I know all of you seen the post that Bird made
I would
with
hope
our
so.
special guest today. Hey, Tempest. Special guest today is Samurai James, and if you guys, most of you had to have heard of him. He's been on YouTube for a while, and I'm kind of jealous of some of the stuff that he has. Like
Uh-oh.
he's got a full on samurai armor set, and I'm totally jealous of that.
I know. I'd like to have one
I
too.
really am.
I'd like to have one
But he
too.
makes I will say he makes some really good videos,
All right.
and it's great to have him on. So let's
Here we go.
get him up here.
Hey, konnichiwa, guys. Thanks for having me on.
What's going on, James?
Pleasure to have you.
So that was a pretty nice intro there. That was cool.
Yeah, thank you.
So I guess Alex, you've been watching his stuff then, huh?
Oh yeah, I've seen his stuff. Yeah.
I didn't know. I don't usually. Sometimes I know who knows who, and sometimes I don't. So I always ask.
I know you did a latest video on part of your samurai armor. Actually, and I haven't gotten a chance to see it yet though.
Yeah, it's part of a 7-part series that I'm doing on supplemental pieces. So the auxiliary neck pieces and the armpits, things that are outside of what you see in a normal suit of armor, to get people kind of more aware of like, hey, samurai armor, the way that we think of it and the way that we see it in a lot of pop culture is true of how most of the basic armor was, but there was a lot of other supplemental pieces that cover things that really just aren't acknowledged that much.
Now, did you get yours from Mountain Armory?
Yes, it's from Iron Mountain Armory. So the green suit that you see here behind me, plus everything that I covered in that supplemental samurai armor video, is all from Iron Mountain Armory.
And I heard they do really good work.
They do. I've been very pleased with their work. You know, it's all stuff that I paid for. Like, they didn't send it to me for free for doing reviews or anything. So, you know, honest reviews on my part, since I'm buying it with my own money. There's no influence there to be like, hey, I'll send it to you for free and get a good review. But I've talked to Michael Astorita, who's the owner of Iron Mountain Armory. I've had armor from them for 8 years, I think now. I bought a used suit that they had about 8 years ago, and that was the first one that I got. And I had an eBay suit at the time. And I was like, wow, this is totally different in the quality of this. Some of the stuff that was a little bit like not great with the eBay armor, I was like, oh, this is so much better. And when I talked to Michael about it, he's like, yeah, that used to be our top tier armor, but now it's kind of equivalent to the middle since it's like 5 years old and used. So they're constantly trying to refine and improve stuff as they go along. So I've always been happy with everything I've got from them.
That's cool. And I do know you can choose different styles of Japanese armor through them too, which a lot of people don't do.
That's what I was going to ask is what other kind of armor do you have? Because I know that you're not talking about just samurai armor. You're talking about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I've got the green samurai armor. I've got a suit of 1450s Italian armor that I'm looking to actually get reworked in June. I'm going to be heading out to the Midwest to have an armor kind of reshape it and fit it to me a little bit better. I bought that one for my 40th birthday at the same time that I got the green one, but it was made by a guy in Ukraine, which they're kind of in that whole civil war thing. So he said I could ship it over to him, but the cost of like sending the armor plus the casts and then shipping it back. And even then it's not going to be an in-person fitment. So like, I'm just not really ready to take that gamble because the cost of shipping is just extreme for, you know, for body fit.
Now, your samurai armor,
if the movement isn't just going to be good.
Now, your samurai armor from Iron Mountain, don't they ask for your measurements?
Yeah, you can either get it with their standard off the shelf measurements, or you can get it custom sized. The green one I have was custom sized, so custom to my specific chest measurements, to my height, and a few things like that. Samurai armor is a lot more forgiving because the armored sleeves, the cote, they're laced up on the inside. Whereas when you have a steel suit that's fully enclosed like that,
Yeah.
it's either not going to close all the way, or it's going to be too big, or, like not Cinderella, whatever her name was with the three bears. That one,
Yeah.
like too big, too little, and just right.
Because I have thought about trying to make a dough because I have an English wheel.
Okay.
And a flashing hammer. So it would be just fitting it just right. Because I know like a lot of times like European armor, the thickness at one time was like 16 gauge on their chest pieces.
European armor, like the repro stuff, tends to be 16 gauge as an average for the mild steel. Historically, they were forging it out of just, blank chunks of steel. So they were able to do incredibly good stuff. And I'm talking about later on when armor making had progressed.
Yeah.
So you might look at a cuirass and, the breastplate here, it might actually be twice as thick or even 3 times as thick in the front on the same sheet of steel than it is on the sides. And that's how they help reduce some of the weight of it. When we look at the historical armors versus the modern ones that are 5, 10, 15 pounds heavier, we're taking rolled steel that's all the same thickness all the way. Whereas historically, they're like, okay, we need to protect in the front of the chest as much as possible. So thicken the plate here, and then even the same plate, they would thin it out here. The actual piece on the corner of the elbow would be thick, and it would be thinner plates as you go up on the art. You know what? Let me step aside here, and I'll be right back.
Okay.
Oh, all right. Well, dang it! Just when it's getting good. What's that? Baby problems. Well, okay. Well, now it sounds like you've had a lot of time to plan about a bunch of questions or something.
Yeah, I figured, if I can visual, then I might as well visual. So
no, I was talking to Alex. He's already on the ball and got all kinds of armor questions, and I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute.
Hey, I told you I've seen some of his videos, man.
Hey, I'm going with it, man.
You got to come in these things prepared.
I'm telling you, man. You take it and run with it. I'm good, man.
Yeah, so something like this. This is off my 16th century suit. And in a historical suit, the piece here, that's the main piece of the elbow, would be thicker steel than it would be as you go into these articulating lanes that go down like that.
Yeah.
Because these are less likely to get hit, and they're doubled over in part of it. So they were really good about optimizing how they were using the steel because it was an expensive material.
Oh, yeah.
But also decreasing the weight to help you with the mobility and the endurance.
Yeah, because I've actually made shields. I made actually a Captain American shield off my
nice
English wheel. I made it out of what was it, 16 gauge? And I'll tell you what, even though it was just 16 gauge, that sucker was heavy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be light.
No.
I mean, you can hold it up, but it's like your arm's going to be tired after a while.
Yeah, and they were used to the conditioning for it, so it's heavier for us than it would be back then. 5 pounds is still 5 pounds, but they were just used to the weight, just like, do you even lift, bro?
Well, yeah, nowadays, like you're saying, you put on suit armor and a shield, you're going to feel that weight because you're not used to it.
For sure.
It's just like the samurai armor. I know there's 2 different styles that they did, and that changed through the time period where they wore it on, like the dough, they would wear it on their shoulders, and eventually it changed where they have the big belt, and the dough would sit on the belt to take all the weight off the shoulders. So they kind of reversed it.
Yeah, the earlier style was the Oyuroi, and that wore heavily on the shoulders, and it was kind of boxy. But that was also during the time where they were primarily mounted archers. So yes, it's sitting heavy on your shoulders, but also you're on a horse. And after the Mongol invasion, they kind of stepped away from that and went more towards the foot-based armors. And then, like you said, if you have that proper padded belt, that goes underneath of the armor, not on top. What you do is you tie that around your waist and you tighten up the armor, the cuirass, the chest plate on it really, really well. And once that's tightened up, you should be able to actually fit your fingers underneath of the strap here on the Watagami, and it's not sitting on your shoulders. So the weight of it is much more bearable that way.
Yeah, because they were starting to fight more on foot too than horseback. You need to be able to move those arms.
Exactly.
If you can't move them, well, you're dead.
Pretty much, yeah.
You're dead.
Yeah,
but it was smart. I like how even in the clothing, though, they would stitch in little metal plates.
Yep.
Kind of like a built-in chainmail. You just couldn't see it.
Yeah, there were some where they would actually, sandwich the mail. They call it kusari. They would sew that between two layers as a type of hidden armor. A couple of them that I talked about with the supplemental series, they're talking about the kikogani, which is these little hexagonal plates that are sewn in between the fabric. That gives you kind of like a hybrid, sort of like a coat of plates, but not exactly. It's all steel inside, but since it's in a bunch of little pieces, it's good at resisting for slashing, not so much for impacts because it is flexible, but some protection is still better than nothing.
Yeah, well, like you were saying, it was mainly for slashing, but if someone did a stab, you get right in between them. But I mean, melee was like in the arm, so it's like very rarely you're going to try and stab somebody in the arm. That's a really hard target to hit.
It is.
Battle. You're mainly going to slash at that, but it would break your bone though. If it hits you hard enough, it could, fracture a bone or break a bone, depending on how much the force was on it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because even some of the stuff that we do, there's a thing called HEMA, which is the historical European martial arts. So with that one, even in the full armor where it's like, okay, swords are going to do nothing here. There are some techniques in the historical effect books that deal with, okay, the way that we're going to beat this guy in armor is we're going to break his arm. And obviously we can't do those, but sometimes it wasn't even about getting through the armor. It's just how do you kill the guy, even if they're still in the armor?
Well, yeah, that even goes to in the European, same in Asian cultures, they would try and crush the armor in certain points so you couldn't move. It made it harder for you to move, hence like the mace or whatever. That's what mainly it was for, is try and dent that armor. Yeah, it could break a bone. Just the impact could, if it hit you in the head, could kill you. But it was to like damage that armor heavily so you couldn't move your arm, couldn't move your legs, or maybe you had a hard time breathing.
Yeah, absolutely. You take a hit from a poleaxe or a mace on the elbow, and sure, this armor flexes, but once it gets dented, if it gets dented enough and you can't move your arm, that becomes a big liability. Something like a pole hammer, we've used rubber-headed ones for our demonstrations, and in the early days, I did, just for doing our Ren Fair shows, not like tournaments, still just playing around with friends, at the most part. I fought myself with a poleaxe against two other guys, but they only got swords. And again, rubber heads on this. And I basically lined up with one guy and watched. And as I saw the other guy coming up on my peripheral, I just swung around like that and clocked him in the head, and then took the back of the axe and then bang, and I got the other one. So I got, killed them both and got the 2 points out of that. But afterwards, I realized even though I was already up like this and hadn't even done like a full around swing, after that exchange, he was over leaning on the side of the fence. And I was like, oh God, I think I gave him a concussion. And we're still not sure like if I actually did or not. And I was like, okay, we need to figure out what we're going to do with these a little bit more, because they're rubber. And, imagine getting hit with a steel one,
Oh, it decimate you.
For sure.
That's the thing. People don't realize, everyone's like, oh, it's just a sword, or it's just a pole arm. Those things did a lot of damage.
That's why they had them.
A lot of damage. It's like you take, I don't care what type of sword it is, katana or whatever, they're highly dangerous, because just even though if it doesn't have like a razor, like hair sharp shaving ability, you got slashed with that, the person could still be fighting because it hasn't registered in your head yet that you just took a major blow to your body and it's just pumping out blood. But the moment it hits your brain, and there's historical records of that. People kept fighting for a minute, maybe 5 minutes, and all of a sudden they just fall over dead because it hadn't reached the brain yet.
Yeah.
Because you don't feel it with all that adrenaline and everything pumping in you. Your body doesn't feel it right away.
Yeah,
It's not like getting shot with a gun. You feel the force because it's blunt force hitting you and stopping. Where a blade just keeps going. It doesn't stop unless it hits a bone. So, people always say that, but it's like, you don't understand how actually dangerous these things are. And those are the ones you always see the YouTube fails on.
Yeah.
Because it's just a sword. It's not that dangerous. Yeah, it is.
Oh yeah, the classics of like that guy that's got like the hot dog on his nose, and they're like, "Oh, go for it!" And I'm like, "Oh no!" Or the one where he has his girlfriend hold the watermelon, and I'm like, "Ah!"
Oh man, well,
Idiots.
I've seen this girl. I don't know what she was thinking. She's like cutting this fruit and throwing it up the air and cutting it. And it's like I always tell people because we have friends come over and they're like, "Yeah, I want to cut," and I tell them, "All right, first the rule is try and control it from overswing because that's the most dangerous thing. Not just because of the weapon, other people if they're not paying attention, and to yourself."
Mm-hmm.
Well, this girl was just swinging this thing around. She swung down like that. Got herself right in the heel.
Oh,
They had to stitch the inside as well as the outside. So she got it really deep.
yep.
Oh,
And it's like, they're not a toy.
No.
Okay. They're not a toy. They're fun to use as long as you're safe with them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like my father-in-law. He wanted to try it. And he was kind of scared. And I said, "Why are you scared?" I said, because I told him, this is the dangerous end. As long as you're below that, you're okay. And just don't like go swinging over here,
Yeah.
you know? But it's like but some people they're intimidated by it. And it's weird. They'll be intimidated by a sword, but not like a firearm. I guess because it's an everyday thing.
yeah.
It is just a sword. It is
Common-
dangerous, but
Commonplace has a lot to do with it.
yeah, it's not going to hurt you as long as you're responsible with it.
Right.
You know,
I was going
but
to say,
it's
I think
cool.
I want to say there's a couple YouTubers that have cut the top of their feet. I ain't going to say any names because I don't know who it is, but I remember talking to some people, and that was one thing they were warning me when I first started out. And hearing about war stories when people were just, people have been into it for a couple of years, telling me, hey, don't do this, don't do that. I think that conversation came up, but I don't remember who it was. But anyway, yeah, it's really, apparently it's really easy to cut the top of your foot with a sword. And I don't, if you got your foot in the wrong place, yeah, you're going to cut it, man, without a doubt.
If you're not paying attention to what you're doing and learn how, the best thing to do, I could tell anybody is, because you can learn on YouTube now. You can learn on the internet.
Right.
Learn to control it. That is the number one thing you always want to do is learn how to control. And it same goes for European swords.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn how to control them because each sword works differently.
They're
you
even
handle
bigger.
it differently. You move it differently, even though the movements are the same because our human mechanics is only going to let us do certain things. That's why a lot of you take, like you were saying, you do HEMA. You take the movements of HEMA and you'll see similarities to either Japanese, Chinese, Philippine swordsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with our human mechanics. We can only move a certain way. There's just variational tweaks to it all.
Yeah.
That you could actually incorporate into your own and it would work. It's just depends on what type of sword you're using. Like Europeans have double edge. Some Asian cultures do, some don't.
Well, now, James, I wanted to, you tagged on that for a second. I wanted to know what kind of festivals have you went to? What kind of competitions were involved in that? It seems to me like you did several different kinds of weapons. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. I've been into a whole bunch of different stuff. So I've done HEMA tournaments and, full armored suit and everything else. I've got a couple of medals from that where I won third place, never took first place, but one of my friends from one of my groups actually won first place in one of them that I was in. So that was kind of cool. I've gone to Ren fairs just in medieval clothing. I've gone in armor at the somewhat local one to us. We've been performing there. This would be our 10th year. We missed a couple of years because of COVID, but we started there 10 years ago, and we've been doing 3 weekends and then 3 shows per day. So 18 shows for that every year, doing the armored combat stuff, and it's mostly to show the crowd like, hey, you've seen a lot of these other choreographed fights, but when we do it at Ren Fair, we actually just straight up fight like you would in a tournament, except just not quite as like playing to win, because we're just doing the first 1 to 3 points just to show the crowd a little bit, but show like, hey, we're in armor. We're wearing the stuff that would be representative of what knights would wear. But notice that we're not really clanky about this. Notice that we're trying to be very precise with our movements. There's not any big, ridiculous stuff. You're not seeing us lock swords together and push on it and be like, because when you do that, if you notice your opponent is pushing hard, let go, let them slide off, and then boom, they're dead. There's a lot of simplicity to sword fights that you just don't get from Hollywood or anything else. Like some of the masters, they say, what's the ideal sword fight? Hit them and they die. That's it. Not this big flurry and parry of exchanges or these crazy tennis matches of back and forth. Kill them as quickly as possible and move on. That's what it's really supposed to be. So I've done that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that is like, because you got other people coming at you. You don't even know if you have someone coming up from behind you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be playing like you were saying, tennis match back and forth here.
Yeah.
You know, the whole goal is to move forward and stay alive.
Yeah. So I've done some of that stuff. I've done a little bit of living history, which is where you try to portray, you know, a specific person, not always a person, but like what would be representative of a person. So I want to do like 1450 to 1460s Italian, and then everything you wear, you know, your undergarments, your armor, and everything else should all be cohesive. It's not kind of a mix and match and pull something off the rack that happens to fit. So trying to be a lot more specific with that. So I built some medieval furniture and stuff like that. We've got a tent that we use for our demo. So kind of been all over the board with that. I wish there was more Japanese stuff to do, and unfortunately there's not. So I've got more experience with the HEMA stuff, but at the same time, for doing the YouTube thing, like I can get dressed in the samurai armor myself, but I can't with the Europeans. So that was really kind of the impetus for, you know, part of what I was going to do with the channel. Was like, hey, when I'm hanging out and want to do derpy stuff by myself, I can get dressed.
Now, do you guys do like put on like historical events too, or in the HEMA, or no?
With HEMA, it's very focused around the martial art itself. So you'll see the HEMA people, they're studying the historical fight books, but it kind of varies from school to school. So there's some that have, you know, my teacher, he was actually taught by Bob Anderson, who was the sword master for The Princess Bride, and I'm drawing a blank on a few of the others. But anyway, Bob Anderson was like an Olympic fencer, known for, you know, his choreography with a lot of movies, some of the Star Wars stuff and all. And my teacher always told us, like, hey, you're going to go to tournaments because it's simply part of the experience. Like, we learn our techniques, we do our, you know, cooperative drills, uncooperative drills, sparring, tournaments, cutting tatami, and everything else. But he said, I would rather watch you lose at a tournament performing proper martial techniques from the FEC books than see you just trying to game the system and win. And there's actually one school we got invited to present at for Armored Combat that said, hey, you know, we discussed beforehand, what do you want us to kind of cover? They're like, well, we want to know most of the time in the tournament, what have you found your most effective techniques to be in, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, you mean like, what do we notice is like the most historical that we tend to do? Like, no, you're like 80%, you know, effective on half sorting and going from this to this. And they were like trying to figure out statistically, how are we going to win a tournament? And we were like, no, that's not what we're doing. Like, we're trying to figure out some of the experience of this. And part of why I ended up with armor, not just because it's cool, because obviously, but like, I wanted to see, what is it like to be in the armor? What's it like to feel like, you know, what does it feel like to get hit with a sword? What does it feel like to be in a suit of armor, to do that sort of thing? And that's what we try to present with that. So we've done demos like for the military and stuff like that, have like little show and tell table for the kids to come up and see stuff. So we try to stick to the historically accurate side of it, but also making it fun for the people watching too. Because, you know, too much history is just too dry.
And that's the thing, like, I mean, it's cool though. Still, you try to keep it historically correct on how they would like battle.
Yeah,
it's not like movie based, because it's like you really don't get the full experience if you're doing it like flamboyant than to being more accurate. You know what I'm saying? Because everyone always sees the movies where they're like, someone can just plow right through everybody and not get touched and whatever.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You're getting banged around.
The classic trope, you know, you get into the battle. What's the first thing you do? Oh, I got to pull my helmet off. You're going to be a target of like everybody at that point. That's nonsense. But, you know, as a producer, if I'm paying $6 million for this guy to be the lead, I want that face on screen, not some rando in a helmet. So like, I get it from the movie perspective. But historically, it's terrible. You know, they're always getting hit, and, you know, it's like, oh, you hit me and nothing happened, and then turn around and, you know, they slash somebody and all of a sudden they're dead, even though like they're clearly wearing armor, but somehow like it magically kills them. So, I mean, movies are what they are. They're meant to be fun. So I try not to charge them too harsh on that. You know, tell me I'm watching a documentary, I'm going to hold you to a higher standard. But, you know, movies, I love The Last Samurai. I love A Knight's Tale. Like, they're terrible from a historical perspective, but still love them for what they are, you know?
They're fun to watch, though. No, I'm not saying they're not bad. It's just, it's fun to watch. It's just, people get the wrong the wrong impression
Yeah.
sometimes, and that's what they expect. I think when people like you go and you do it, and you're showing historically how they would do it, and they're kind of like, well, that isn't what I saw in a movie. Well, yeah, it's because that's a movie,
Yeah.
So
I was going to say, I mean, even the movies with the guys with the coolest helmets, they still end up coming off in some way.
Right.
Right.
Doesn't matter how cool they are, and it's hard to be a cool helmet, man. With a good face mask and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's sometimes hard to beat, and they still end up coming off. But I was going to ask you, James, and I was curious about this myself. So I looked it up, and the local Renaissance Fest in my area, they wouldn't allow weapons. So it kind of discouraged me from even trying to get dressed up as a samurai. And I was wondering if that kind of thing is even welcomed at said Renaissance Festival anywhere. If you ever seen anybody go samurai there or...
Yeah, I've done samurai at our local fair, and you know, the fairs are generally owned and operated by, you know, distinct different people. So what applies at one fair doesn't apply at the other. So one we go to that we've never worked at, but I've been going to for about 25, 26 years. My dad first took me in high school, and I still go there to see the shows. I dress up. I sometimes do the armor, sometimes do the carb and all. The one that we work at will allow real weapons if they are piece tied, meaning zip tied into the scabbard or something so that it cannot be removed.
Right.
But the one that we go to just for fun does not allow weapons at all. Now, I've got through that with the samurai swords, and I put up a video of it of, you know, cutting the blades off of a sword. And that's actually how they let us through. I'm basically walking in with a saya and, you know, what looks like a sword if you don't take it out, but it's only about 3 inches of the blade, which is enough to keep it from falling out. And it's just got some duct tape around it, basically, to keep it snug in the saya like that. And then, you know, the security guys there, they're like, cool, that's not a weapon. You know, they check us at the gate and they let you go, and it's all good from there. But that all stems from, they used to allow weapons. And this is a really big, you know, well-established Ren fair. They've been around for, I think, 40 odd years now. And one guy at the bar, you know, 2 decades ago, decided that he definitely wanted some more to drink, whereas the bartender was like, nah, you've had enough. So they sent him on his way, and he just walked to one of the other little pubs there in the fair, and he was like, hey, give me a beer. And he's like, nah, you're very visibly drunk. And he's like, whoosh, and he whipped out a knife on the bartender. And he was like, I want my fucking alcohol. And they were like, okay, well, from now on, no weapons.
Right. It only takes one bad apple.
Exactly.
Yeah, we have a Celtic fair once a year. I haven't been to it in a long time, but they're, like you were saying, you could walk in, but they had a zip tied shut.
Yeah.
You know, so you couldn't draw them. I don't know if that's
changed.
I've been there in a long time.
Not only that, I was just wondering if anybody dressed in that, you know, dressed in that Edo period era. Because, I mean, historically, that's the same period.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, there was samurais during the Renaissance age and all and whatever. So, you know, medieval times, that was samurais. So.
Oh yeah, totally. And that varies fair to fair. Like with Ren Fair versus Living History, you go to Living History, it is purely living history, and sometimes they have a range of dates or, you know, places that you're allowed to do for that. So you won't see people walking around in fairy costumes or anything like that. At the Ren Fair, like you see the fairies, you see the Star Trek people, like you get a mix of people. But our particular fair, it started off kind of as an in-joke with the cast themselves. So there's different sanctioned like theme weekends, but it's like Pirates Weekend and Celtic Weekend, things like that.
Right.
And this particular fair sit in a specific place and location using historical people. And then the cast themselves on the very last day of fair, and this goes back, I think, maybe 2.5 decades, they would start wearing something wrong. So they would wear like 13th century medieval European garb instead of 15th century. And they started calling it the Day of Wrong. And like, you know, what kind of a super nerd can figure out we're wearing medieval European clothing from the wrong, you know, time period. But then it started spilling over into like people coming as, I'm not kidding, like Santa, the Easter Bunny, the Grinch, like all sorts of crazy stuff like that. So that's the one day a year that I'm like, hey, I got to armor up in the samurai armor and I'm going to head out to fair. And I usually get a couple of friends to do it. So this past year, there was 4 of us wandering around in samurai armor for that day.
Oh, it makes it fun.
For sure. Yeah.
And that's really what these fairs, it really is, to kind of have fun, you know?
Yeah.
and not just that, but entertaining for everybody else.
Exactly.
Well, now, what kind of weapons have you used in competitions?
In competitions, like I said, there's no Eastern martial arts type stuff that I've been able to do at competitions around here recently. I did nunchucks way back when I was in high school and took karate for that, but that was long time ago. For the HEMA stuff, I've used dagger, we've used longsword, we've used spear, we've used poleaxe, and I think that might be the 4 main ones because it's the ones that we tend to see in a lot of the fight books. That's the only ones I can remember offhand, anyway.
You're saying those are rubber?
The poleaxe is rubber. The long swords are steel. The daggers are steel. The spears are also steel as well. But the poleaxe is just that the mass of it and everything, for sake of the mass and also just not completely wrecking the armor, those are rubber. Because with those, we do take shots to the head. We take shots to the joints. So sometimes those can be considered as valid points because, on the battlefield, you get hit with a poleaxe hard enough. Even if it doesn't outright kill you, it might knock you off balance long enough for someone to capitalize on that. So we tend to be a little bit not softer, but like more forgiving in things like that because we don't want to be injuring each other. We don't want to be giving each other concussions. Using the spear, using the longsword, using the dagger, we're going for the openings in the plate. We're trying to get into the mail and really ride into it, what we sometimes call like couching with the sword. So you get the point into the mail, you get your arm under and you start pushing on that cross guard to really drive. And, if you can displace and push somebody's shoulder out of place like that to show that I've got enough pressure where I might have broken a link or caused them some sort of injury, that's where we tend to give points for something like that. But with a poleaxe, some of them have a stabbing end on them, but since it's just a blunt head, you just got to be a little bit more careful with that so that people aren't trying to swing for the fences just to get a point out of it and giving someone a concussion.
Oh, yeah, because you're already knocking that equilibrium off of them.
Yep.
Even with a gentle blow, they're going to be kind of like, whoa, just a little bit.
Sounds like a lot of caution has been really thought out to avoid injuries. It sounds like in that HEMA arena.
For sure. The unarmored stuff is a little bit more loose, but with the armored stuff, armor's expensive. So it's more of a close-knit community on a lot of that. The armor goes through validation from judges and safety people before you get to fight like that. So they get familiar with, okay, where do you have mail? Okay, if you've got a specific type of helmet, you have to have supplemental protection for your neck, even if it's not technically historically correct, because we need it for safety. So because of all those things and kind of restrictions on it, we have perf plate in our helmets to keep, any weapon blades from sliding through and causing potentially catastrophic issues. They tend to be a little bit more strict on the points, but also because it's armor as worn. With the unarmored stuff, it's considered that you're not armored. So you hit somebody on the hand, whether they have hard plastic on the hands or not, there's specific gloves are allowed, but you might have solid plastic forearm protectors because you just don't want your forearm to get broke or something.
Yeah.
But even at that, in the unarmored stuff, that's still a point whether you have the plastic there or not. Whereas with the armored stuff, we do what they call armor as worn. So if I have solid plate here, cool, hit it all day long. It doesn't do anything. But if somebody else has, a partial in here where it might just be a plate on the outside and then mail on the inside, like some German types of armors often had more mail than plate, well, all that chainmail is a valid target. And somebody might have a lot of targets and somebody might have a few targets. And of course, there's things that have to be covered or you simply can't play. But since it's armor as worn, it's just a lot more that goes into looking at it and judging it and fighting with it because it's not the same old like it is with the unarmored fighters.
Yeah. In fact, I just saw this today. It's you probably heard of him, Purple Armory.
Purple Heart
Armory.
Yeah. Purple Heart made one of the trainer swords I have and a few other things. Yep.
They now have a sparring katana.
Oh, cool. I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, it looks just like a katana, except it's the same thickness all the way through. It doesn't have, taper on it. Mm-hmm. And what they did, they have the Mark II now. So what they did for the Mark II, because they found out the Mark I was too heavy, from right here, they cut this section out all the way to about here to make it lighter. And then, of course, the end is rounded off.
Mhm.
but it's designed to actually spar with, and it's flexible, so it won't just take a bend.
Oh, cool.
And then
Now,
what's cool about it is it's kind of made like a fencing foil. The crosser on the back just screws on. So you slip the handle on, you screw it on. So if the handle gets messed up or you need to buy a new blade, you just unscrew it, pull your handle off. And yeah, I just discovered that now. They're like $270 or something like that for them.
That's not bad for something you can replace the blade on and service yourself.
Yep. And then if you want, you could pay extra and get leather wrapped.
Okay.
So
well,
yeah, I
now,
just found that out today. I was like, that's hecka cool. Because there was never any sparring katanas really, except you get a cheap one and you dull it.
Yeah.
You know? But now there's one that you can beat them all you want all day long. And that's what they're designed to do.
Yeah, that's cool to see, because one of the things I'd like to do at some point is kind of the East versus West, and suit up in the samurai gear and fight some of my HEMA friends. But there's just a lot of concessions that you would have to make with historical samurai armor to be able to fight in a HEMA context. So, the face protection isn't really adequate, and there's a lot of other things that would need supplemental pieces. And I feel like it would be fun, but at the same time, I don't feel like it would be a really valid comparison at that point, because I'm trying to supplement and alter the armor so much to get, hard elbow protection, things like that, where I'm kind of hybridizing it. I'm like, hey, let's take a samurai armor and then merge it and see what it would happen if they had like a baby with a knight and a samurai, and end up with this weird conglomeration just so I can fight against one of the HEMA guys. And I'm like, it would be fun, but I don't think it would have a lot of historical practical value. But I'm still probably going to do it at some point, honestly.
Hey, why not? Try it. Now, the only drawback with those right now, though, is they don't have a saya for them. But on their webpage, it does say, though, if there's more demand for them, they will start making sayas for them specifically. Okay. So you don't get a saya with it.
And that's not really a deal breaker for me. A lot of the stuff that we do with HEMA is what they call judicial duels, which is, person A versus person B. But in that context, you can a lot of times assume like their swords are already drawn, just like on the battlefield with samurai. Like if you're fighting the very first person, you're not even starting off with a katana. You've got a yumi, you've got a spear, you got a naginata. Your sword is your, something went horribly wrong and I need my sword weapon. Like it's always in movies. It's like everybody's got a katana, and
close combat.
Yeah, for close combat and all. But close combat, and give me a choice between a naginata and a sword. I want a sword, unless Bird, you understand this one. Unless Ryan's sword made the naginata, then give me the sword.
But, exactly.
Or you're just gonna wind up killing yourself with it,
Exactly. Right. Or somebody behind me, like, oh, sorry, bro.
Or at least a nagamaki.
Nagamaki are neat,
that too, though.
Everybody say hi to Blind Samurai. He's in the chat.
Hey, what's up,
Daniel?
So, and I was going to say too, the whole HEMA thing. It seemed that the weapons, the actions, the movements are limited because they need to be more safe. I mean, you just don't come in and just try to hack somebody's skull. I mean, you guys are more, you wait for an opening, kind of, you know what I'm saying, and it all comes back to safety.
And some of that is safety, and some of that is just two completely different philosophies with the way that they fought. So the samurai and just Japanese martial arts in general, a lot of it is what we in HEMA call voiding, which is if somebody's trying to attack, then you want to kind of get out of the way of the attack. Whereas the one that I study the most is the German Lichtenauer tradition. And in that,
I'm just talking about European. I didn't.
Yeah. So Japanese, the idea is to get out of the way, whereas the German, if somebody's coming at you, you've got the cross guard and everything else. The idea is attack and defend at the same time. Raise your sword, catch their blade on the cross guard, and go in. So it's a limited movement, but because you're trying to attack and defend in one motion, whereas a lot of the Japanese martial arts are more of void and attack. So it looks more exaggerated because their swords had a very good sharp edge. But I mean, you guys know swords and tempering and everything. European swords are through hardened for the most part, and Japanese swords are differentially hardened for the most part. So you really don't want to be banging katana edges together. You can do it, but it's not good for the sword. Whereas, come at me with your through hardened blade, bro, whatever. I've got a cross guard, bang, you're dead. So it looks like a smaller motion, but that's what it is in the treatises, because you're able to protect yourself and attack at the same time with a more, a smaller fluid motion.
Okay, well, that makes more sense then. All right. that explains that.
Yeah, and
I know it was
without
more.
seeing,
It
go
doesn't
ahead.
sound so safety related now that you explained it. It's more like in the style itself and the
Yeah.
sword. The
Yeah.
sword that's
I
doing
don't know. I lean more towards Japanese. Just step out of the way of the blade. You know,
And they
if
do
you're
that in
able
the
to do it
German
without getting
martial
hit,
arts.
just step out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah, the German martial arts, the Italian, they have things, they call it voiding, which is stepping out of the way. They have, concepts of, Indus, knock, and vor, which is the before, the during, and after. So if you see an attack in enough time to get out of the way, an attack, cool, but that's usually not the first thing, because as you're getting out of the way, that opens up for them to launch a second attack while you're preparing your counterattack. Whereas if you're simply able to catch their attack on the way in, defend while attacking at the same time, well, maybe you killed him and everything is cool. But even if you didn't, well, now you control. You're the one that made the last threatening action, and they have to start responding to you. So you start to control the tempo until they're able to flip it.
Yeah, it all deals with timing and speed.
Mhm.
How quickly you can respond. And
Yep.
I learned that really quickly when I was in college taking fencing. I mean,
Mhm.
you've got to
On it.
there's no stopping. You
No.
have to be quick on your feet and be able to think of how you're going to do it, like just right in the moment.
What kind of
Because
fencing did you do? Did you do foil, epee, or saber?
foil.
Foil. Okay. Yeah, one
And
of the
we
key.
did more of it was more older style traditional where you don't even have a timeout. You go until you get your 3 points. Just
Okay.
bam, bam, bam.
Yeah, things like that are fun. The HEMA stuff, they've had different rule sets. Sometimes it's you get a point and then you reset and you go again. I've seen some with the armor where it's, the first one to get 5 points while actively up on your feet, or to throw your opponent to the ground. So it's a lot different when you don't have that kind of safety thought of, cool, I got him in the armpit and I know it's going to reset, where you have to think, I can get him in the armpit, but am I off balance enough that he's simply going to throw me to the ground after? So it's a whole different dynamic in the fight. And the HEMA stuff can be interesting too, because with a lot of the foil fencing, and you see it in the Olympic guys, boop, touch, and that's it. And it's just whoever touches first, and that's it. With the HEMA stuff, and I'm speaking in general, I can't speak to the exact videos that you've seen with it, but the idea that I was talking about with the attacking and defending, HEMA, we have something called the afterblow, which means if I hit you in the hand and you hit me in the hand a half second later, we throw it out because it's essentially a double kill. So we have that concept of within the same action. So if you hit me and I hit you within one action afterwards, you fail to protect yourself, because just like you were saying earlier with the adrenaline, getting hit in the hand isn't going to be specifically the end of the fight. You don't simply die the minute that they hit your hand on the way in. So when you're attacking, you have to be defending. So tight, controlled motions are what you want, because it helps protect you and it helps attack at the same time.
Yeah, when I took that fencing, that was fun, and it was like in order to win, we had to get 3 points.
Mhm.
So if you got a point, okay, you go back and you to the center, restart. What sucked was if I had 2 points, my opponent had 2 points. Now the judge called sudden death, which means we're going into overtime now, people.
Mhm.
So it's whoever gets a point, that'll be it. And I've been in about to win over an hour because we both had 2 and we weren't going to lose. One of us was not going to lose.
Mhm.
And it's an intense sport, but I mean, it's like, and you can attest to this. You're wearing a helmet, and I was inside with air conditioning,
Right.
but you're outside. It don't matter if you have air conditioning. You're dying underneath all that. And
No, we've actually.
I had, you would call a Gambison,
Mhm.
coat. You're dying underneath that stuff.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, you're hot as hell.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt you for a second. Wyatt Bird was getting lost in our topic here. I wanted to tell him, I hope he's still in the chat though, because we're going to have a knife guy on soon that just got a sword. He actually won a sword for me, and we're going to have him on. He's going to ask a bunch of beginner questions. So I think Mattisfaction might be on next week or the following week. I'm not sure yet. But so Wyatt Bird, you might want to check it out. Anybody who's interested in beginning katana, that would be a good show to watch. So, and back to you, Alex.
No, I was just saying it gets hot underneath that stuff. I mean,
It does. We fought we fought outdoors, we fought indoors, we fought at a few tournaments indoors. I fought, at one a few times. It's in a hotel in an air conditioned, ballroom type space. And yeah, it still just gets insanely hot in there. And there was one where I had to fight multiple exchanges in a row just because of how things rolled up and down with that. And after that, when, my helper basically took my helmet off, they said, you could see like the like sizzle of like the difference in temperature from pulling it off, seeing me drenched in sweat with the air conditioning. And yeah, even with the air conditioning, like just, still burning up inside of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's grueling when you get into this stuff like HEMA or even like Japanese swordsmanship or whatever. It's grueling on you. People don't understand. It's like, because you're moving your body in certain ways that you normally wouldn't, because it's like everyday life, we don't move that way. Right. But if you're going to reenact or even learn how to use a sword, you have to move your body a certain way. And it's so, you don't get hit. It's like whenever I see people and they like, even on YouTube, and they're using, it doesn't matter what sword they're using, and they're keeping their body square, straight. And it's like, no, you would not do that.
No.
At one point, you have to turn your body. You have to turn it because it makes it a harder target to hit. If you're not turning your body, you're going to lose 100%. There are stances, where you keep squared up, but it's for a really quick strike. Other than that, your body's turned.
Right.
It's turned to the side. Otherwise, you're going to die. That's why, like in fencing, your body is always turned sideways because it's harder to hit and make a point because you have to keep the tip. Wherever you hit on the chest, it's got to stay there for the judge to see. But it's harder to do if I'm like this.
Yeah.
To keep it on there from bouncing off.
Yep. Yeah, I've got a friend that does a style called destreza, which is essentially Spanish rapier, and it's very much standing up with the blade forward, except, just like you did, you're standing sideways like this. And that's, it's a very scary tip coming right at you the whole time. And you just got this narrow profile and you're like, I've got very little target either way to try to hit on this, but also there's 5 feet of sword in front of me like this, between the reach of the sword blade plus their arm, that's like, 5.5 feet. So it's definitely a lot more scary than seeing somebody sideways like this, where you're like, oh, I've got all this right here that I can target. So it's a totally different feeling. I'm sure
even your guys' HEMA, when you do the historical deals, you're turning your body one way or the other to avoid a hit, or so it's harder for someone to hit you,
Yeah, a lot of that, we're turning. Sometimes it's, you're trying to couch an attack back here where, like this, and then you're coming through and, you're trying to attack to where it's essentially an opening. So we divide it into quarters. And, I saw in the chat where they're saying it's getting over the head. But, if I'm standing this way and the openings are on the other side, I might, throw an attack around the other way to try to capitalize on something else. And it's really just a human game of chess. If I do this, can I provoke a certain reaction that I want? Because if I can provoke that reaction, I know exactly what my next follow-up is going to be. So I'm going to try to provoke you into blocking somewhere so I can attack right where you're not and hope that I can get to that spot before you're able to block.
Exactly.
And that's, Eastern martial arts, Western martial arts, karate, boxing, any of that. It's all the same sort of idea.
Yeah. It's misconception. Look here while I move over to here, or divert their attention to something else. And for everybody in the chat is saying it's getting a little bit overhead. See, we're educating you guys. We're giving you advice how to do it.
It was just Wyatt Bird said something because he just came in the chat. I've never heard of him before, so I don't really know him. He's never really commented on my videos, so I don't know how long he's been watching my channel, or if he's from James's channel or what. But he said he just got involved in the sword stuff, so it was kind of over his head what we were talking about. So that's why
and that's the thing, he'll learn it. I mean, that's the nice
exactly.
thing. If you're getting into swords, it's good to hear it now and learn it and start off somewhere, because like I was saying earlier.
In my case, you'll hear it again, and then that'll come back to you and say, oh, well, that's what they were talking about.
Exactly. When you start practicing it, it will come to your head and go, oh, yeah. And you're going to find out when you start cutting, like even in my videos, I try and remember to turn my body. If I'm going to the left, I turn my chest that way. If I'm going to the right, I turn to the right that way. So that way my body's always turning. It's never, unless it's a straight on cut like you're doing a mat, I'm always turning my body. Always. And I think some of that has to do with because I took 2 years of fencing too. So it took a while for it to come back, but it has come back. It's just like I saw a video, I think it was with Shogo, where they were talking about it's quicker to respond with one hand on a sword than two. And yes, it is actually, because this hand has to follow you. So that hand can slow you. But if you have one hand, you can move it a lot faster.
Half-Breed has a good question here.
What's that one?
He says, imagine getting all that armor on and having to poop.
So,
how difficult is that really?
You know, my favorite thing to quote when I get that sort of question at Ren Fair or something is straight up Iron Man 1. It's, you know, how do you go to the bathroom in the suit? You know, like that. So, you know,
excuse me for a minute. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
and they probably did.
Sure. I mean, when your life is on the line, you know, if you had to go in the suit, you went in the suit. There's, you know, some, depending on, you know, I don't really know like if it's really true or not, but I've heard things of, you know, the term water closet for bathroom coming from essentially going off into an area and basically rinsing yourself off like that in the closet, you know, more or less. So water closet, because when you had to go, you had to go. Like there's not time on the battlefield to gear down. For my 16th century suit and all, it can take 45, 60 minutes to get into it at a leisurely pace. If I have to go quick and I've got two helpers, I could do it in probably 15 or 20 minutes if they're familiar with the armor and everything.
I wouldn't even have to go anymore at that point.
Yeah. Right? And, you know, some of that, you don't have to get everything off to go. You know, I can leave the helmet on. I can leave the arms on. I can leave the body armor on, because remember, these guys are sitting in horses and stuff. So it's got to be able to compress up to get into a saddle. Likewise, it can compress up if you got to take, you know, a number 2 there. But you still got to be able to get your pants down, which often involves, you know, untying the top of the legs, but you don't have to take off the lower legs. You don't have to take off the feet. So it's not the fastest thing in the world. But, you know, what we also like to say is let those who must go forth in armor today go before they put on the armor today.
Right. Well, it's just, it's kind of similar because I knew a kid who surfed. Okay. I asked him, what do you guys got to do if you got to go to the bathroom? He said, well, if we got to pee, we just pee in our wetsuit.
Yeah.
And he said what they do is after they do that, sometimes if it's cold out, they'll pull the neck down and scoop some of the seawater up, and it creates a heater in them.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. He says, it sounds disgusting, but you're staying warm now.
Yeah. I mean, you're in the ocean, so whatever.
He said, we just pee in it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You know.
Okay. So now you guys were talking about fencing. So now, and then movies. So movies are generally fake. We all know that. But there's one good movie, The Princess Bride.
Mm-hmm.
Now that fight scene is pretty much one of the ultimate scenes. But I was curious, a more obscure scene that I enjoy myself is the fight scene in young Sherlock Holmes.
I haven't seen that one.
You haven't never seen it?
I don't remember much of it.
Well, I mean, Sherlock actually took fencing from the bad guy. He ended up being the bad guy. He actually took fencing lessons at the school from him. And he ended up being the bad guy, and then they fought real big at the end. So if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. I mean, I think it's right up there with Princess Bride. It's much longer fight scene, too, for one thing.
Mm-hmm. If you actually want to see historical like fencing in a movie, watch The Duelist.
I've seen parts of that one.
I think I've seen it, but I wasn't
they actually did bring in real people on that.
I've seen it, but I wasn't into swords then, so I didn't know what I was watching.
The Duelist. That is the most. They actually, even people who practice swords say that is the most historical, accurate fighting that they have ever seen in a movie. Is The Duelist.
You don't think Princess Bride scene is very accurate?
Princess Bride is pretty good. You know, I'd mentioned earlier Bob Anderson. He was one of the sword instructors for that. And he was, you know, an actual professional fencer, so he knew a lot of that. So while they're talking during the fight scene, and I'm sorry it's late and my brain is going blank on this, but, you know, they're saying, like, you must be expecting me to attack with X and, you know, counter with this. They're talking, Capoferro is one of them. Yeah. Those are actual fencing masters from medieval Europe. So he's talking, like, he's actually mixed in historical names with it, which is a cool little nod.
That is cool.
No, they did a good job on The Princess Bride.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole swinging over the beam and stuff, that's obviously for show and everything.
They added some flair in it, but if you want just straight, like, no flair to it, they say The Duelist is the most out, because that's how it would be.
Yeah.
You just go up, duel. If you kill the guy, you just walk away.
Yep.
And that's what they do in the movie. They just walk away.
There's a cheesy movie that's like 30 years old. It's called Showdown in Little Tokyo. It's actually got... Oh, have you? Yeah, the fight scene at the end, you know, it's Brandon Lee, which is Bruce Lee's son, and Dolph Lundgren, so you're not expecting too much out of it.
Oh,
Fight
okay.
scene at the very end in the parade, like that's really well done. You know, he goes to reach for the sword, and the dude's like, "Nope," and just cuts his hand. So it's very well done.
Yeah,
You know,
the
something I
katanas,
didn't
no, they did
expect.
that good.
Yeah,
They
that was a
actually
really
did.
well done one, and you know, something that's not even trying to be a historically accurate movie or anything
No.
else. I was really surprised to see how well they did with that.
Yeah, well, it's just like on previous lives that we did, Highlander, the first movie,
Mhm.
the only good one.
Yeah.
They actually did bring swordsmanship people in, European and samurai, to teach the actors how to use them.
Oh, okay.
Even though it's more, I mean, movie stuff, they did teach them how to handle them and everything, how the movements should be.
Mhm.
Because each, like I was saying, each sword is always different. Even though
Yeah.
our mechanics are the same, you're going to use it differently.
Yeah, for sure. Even, you know, the same sword, you know, has different types of schools for it. You know, there's dozens of Japanese ruha for how they use the katana. It's the
Oh
exact
yeah,
same sword of almost the exact same length, and they use it in different ways. For the HEMA guys, you know, there's Italian and German. So, you know, in the
yeah,
German, we have a guard called ox, which is where you're up and you point the sword forward, kind of like the horns on an ox. Well, the Italians do almost the exact same thing, but they have the sword canted over at an angle. I don't know why, because I don't do a lot of Italian for that, but it's almost the same thing. And, you know, in the Japanese, there's the overhead jodan. So
yeah.
you know, the basic guards in HEMA are very, very similar to ones that they actually have as some of the very common ones in the Japanese ruha as well.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
They all
Now,
they all cross over somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
um, have you, have you had the same? Because I know you've had a lot of HEMA training and stuff and learning that. Have you had the equivalent with the katana?
I wish I could say yes, but unfortunately not. There's just no Eastern martial arts stuff near me. So a lot of it, you know, I've
Really?
been reading books and stuff like that, trying to see things on YouTube because sometimes things just translate better in a video than in a book because in a book you're getting frame A, frame B, frame C, and they're telling you what to do in between. And even that,
Right.
it, you know, it kind of seems like we can figure it out, but that's actually some of the core problems in HEMA too, is we have these historical manuscripts and it says something like, if he goes for the crown, take it down. Huh? Like,
Yeah,
okay, well,
right.
you're
What are you
supposed to,
talking about?
yeah, and you know, you're supposed to hold the sword up and the cross guard protects you here, kind of like a crown. But the idea is, you know, if you swing like this, it deflects. But if he goes
Yeah,
for the crown, take it down. Well, if you pull up on the handle of the sword, so instead of swinging down like this, if you swung from above, take it down means bring the sword blade down. So instead of this going up, now it's coming right into the middle of my skull. But we also only have, you know, starting position, middle of the attack, and the end. And we have to figure out what are they doing with their hands? How are they transitioning between this? And even in the HEMA group, because none of this has been a living tradition like the Japanese ones, where it's
yeah,
been handed down and they've been acting it out and showing, like, hey, next generation of students, here's how we did it. Here's how we did it. The HEMA stuff just died off. So we're trying to recreate it from books. And there's even some clubs who disagree on interpretations of the actual manual, saying your way is wrong and our way is right. But at the same time, like, we have A and we have C and we have E, and we don't know what B and D are. And you can have two completely different interpretations on that that are actually both potentially still valid.
yeah. I've heard that with HEMA. There's a lot of, when it comes to the manuscripts, there's some conflict there between
Yeah.
groups, and it's like you saying, nobody carried it over.
Hmm.
You know, like in tradition, it died out per se, and then just all of a sudden people decide to pick it up and start doing it, which is fine. But it's like, instead of arguing about it, everyone should get together and try and figure it out. Am I right? Or are you right? Are we both wrong? Because
And
there's got to
that's,
be somewhere they can try and figure some of this out and come to an agreement, you know?
You would think.
Because
yeah.
I can see that turning some people off. You know, you're like, well, if you go to one HEMA school and let's say that one closes down, you go to a different one, they're like, well, everything you learned, they're wrong and you shouldn't listen to them. It's just going to be an off put to people,
Well, that's what
you
turns
know?
me off from even. I mean, because there's Aido classes around here in St. Louis, but I won't go because they tell you what kind of sword to buy. They tell you, the whole style is based on what they want you to learn. It's not, I mean, not what I want to learn. If I'm going to pay you, you're going to teach me what I want to learn, not what you want me to learn, because that might not be valid, and it's usually not. So that's really turned me off of the whole scene of it. So I'd rather learn watching YouTube than you know. But then again, I'm pretty good at teaching myself. Some people ain't astute like that, so I don't know.
And this
So
is,
when did you what did you get into first, European or Asian, and what got you into katanas?
so let me circle back to that in just a second because I wanted to mention something with HEMA and everything online too. So this is one of those things where like social media is great, but also it's the worst thing in the world too. Where you were talking about like, can't these schools just get together and figure stuff out? Most of the arguments end up happening online as like, I hate to say keyboard warriors, but like keyboard warriors, but keyboard warriors who actually go out and really fight in real life, just not with each other. Because the school that I go to, a lot of the other local schools, we've gone, some people actually go to multiple HEMA schools at the same time in two different groups, and we'll try to figure out like, hey, we think it's A and they think it's B. Let's actually test it out. Let's do some free fencing. Let's see what actually works out with this. So what happens is the local groups tend to be a lot more cohesive and agreeable, whereas if everything you're trying to learn about it is all online, that's where you see most of the contention because they're trying to show like, I know the most about this, so come and study at my school and blah, blah, blah. Whereas, when you step outside from the big picture of that and get to some of the more localized groups, it's a lot more close knit. They're a lot more friendly. They're a lot more interactive. And sometimes, you just get a bad school here and there. We have a guy named John Clements in the HEMA group that, he's always said, like, I'm the one true God of sword fighting. If you study at my school, you shall not study at any others. And like, I wish I was joking about that, but I'm not. He's always said, I know the way that these are interpreted and stuff. And he's really made himself a pariah within the group. But over the last 5 years or so, like, I don't even follow a lot of the HEMA forums anymore because I'd seen the same thing start happening, but also with the signal to noise, because I've been in it long enough that I can look and see, like, somebody asks a question and I can see a well-known established fencer that I know give an answer, which is the correct answer for most cases of that, or at least the most common interpretation of it. And then 11 other people would give something different or something conflicting, but you don't know who to listen to. Whereas I know this is the established person. And then some of these other people, I'm like, I don't even know who they are. I don't know if they've ever picked up a sword, gone to a tournament, or they just deciding this based on videos that they've watched with no practical application. So,
Yeah.
That's where the social media gets a little bit rough on it, just trying to figure out who do I listen to, who do I not listen to. And, the loudest voice is not always the one that knows what they're talking about, because eventually you just get tired of yelling at the walls.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know that you guys, where you're at, get together and do try it.
Yeah.
Because really, you're not going to know unless you do.
Yeah.
That's the thing,
exactly.
And that would make life in the HEMA probably world a lot easier for everybody, because then everybody come to agreement. Okay, we tried this. It actually didn't work, but this does work,
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that like one party was right and the other one was wrong. It's just everyone's actually, we're actually figuring this out, what it really was, and really that's part of all of it, is trying to figure out and learn, is that how they actually did it?
Yeah, and like the funny and scary thing about that is we might all eventually in 20 years come to an agreement. This is what the interpretation of this particular one is, and it definitely works for us almost all the time. We still might have it wrong, and we're never going to know without a time machine, but we've at least got a common consensus on it. So,
but
anyway,
if it's working over everything else, I mean, it's going to be hard to dispute it.
Right. So, Bird, could you repeat the question? I know it was which did I get into first and how did I get into it?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you got into European and katanas at the same time or one before the other. And if so, what got you into katanas? So now that you said you haven't had any training in it, and I know you had training in European swords, I was just curious.
It's a little bit of both. My first sword was a ninja sword that was, a black one that's like all blacked out, black blade. It's got throwing stars that pop off the handle. It's got the hidden kunai knives and all. But I got that when I was like 12 or 13 years old. I got a katana shortly after that, which was a, by modern standards, absolutely terrible one. It's a cast plastic handle that's made to look like Samigawa. The Ito wrap has long since fallen apart and everything. Stainless steel blade. But again, like this was the early 90s, so that's kind of what you could get with it. And even back then, it was like $100, which is a lot for a teenager too, to be, popping out. And my dad took me to the Ren Fair when I was in high school. It was a year or two after that, and I picked up a medieval European stage sword after that. but I hadn't done any training in anything at that point. That was just me being like, cool, I'm a teenager. Mom will let me, give her money and then she'll put it on her credit card. And, you had to be, if you're under 18, parents' permission and all that stuff that, we have long since been out of. But that's how I ended up with those. And through one of the guys that I went to school with, I was over at his house after school, just hanging out, playing and everything. And he ended up having piano lessons. His piano teacher was actually a martial arts instructor. And I didn't know that. I think we were watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Ronin Warriors or something. And there was one of those comments of like, oh, that's awful, blah, blah, blah. And we were like, huh? And after that, he actually opened a school and he taught for years. So that's where I had my 2 years of Eastern martial arts on that. But eventually he got another job and everything and went off taking that. And I graduated from high school. And that was kind of the end of that with the Eastern stuff. A few years later, I ended up going into the SCA, learning the rattan fighting for a season and everything, but trying to do it in a full suit of steel armor. And SCA doesn't do armor as worn. They do the assumption that no matter what you're wearing, it's equivalent to a chainmail shirt and, one of those helmets that has the little nasal in the front. And that's it. So I'm out here trying to fight people that are in 25-pound plastic armor while I'm wearing 70 pounds of steel because I want that experience. And I kept getting my butt handed to me, obviously, because I was new. I'm wearing, double the stuff for the equipment and I'm not that good at it. I learned some armor maintenance stuff. I learned how to replace straps, how to set rivets, how to do basic stuff like that. So it was still time well spent. But that eventually died off. And then a few years later at the Ren Fair, bumped into a couple people and, found them online as well. And I was like, hey, are you guys local? We got into the whole HEMA thing. They told me about that. Come to find out that there's actually a teacher, 15 minutes from my house. So that's how I ended up in HEMA and being in that for 10 minutes. Or sorry, not 10 minutes, 10 years. And, I'd like to
quick lesson.
Yeah. I'd love to find something that has some Eastern martial arts type stuff. And there's a handful of like karate things around here and all. There used to be I think it's Korean one called something Gumdo or whatever, which was essentially cutting with a sword, which I thought would be kind of cool. But I was just never able to match up schedule because it was like, we do it on Wednesdays at 2:00. And I was like, I've got a day job. I can't do that. And, that's long since closed down. So I wish there was something local and I'd definitely be into trying to do that. But, myself, I've got, a toddler and a 3-month-old baby now too. So I'm getting to the point where I just can't be going out and doing that every week as much as I would like to either. So there's things where, real life is going to have to take practicality on that. But, still I can watch the videos. I can try to learn some stuff, play around on the weekend with friends here and there when time permits. So still trying to stay active with things, but just, reality of time and adult life, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's funny how you brought up, it was like Korean swordsmanship because my tattoo artist, he studied Korean swordsmanship, which now Korean sword is almost identical to a katana, but there's variations to it. And he said there was a move he hated his instructor for it because what you do is because we're always, let me see here. We our hands right here. It's never up on the fuchi. You leave that gap. Okay, and we have our hand down below. Well, you take this hand, you slide it all the way down to the kosher like this, and then he says you stretch, and he makes you stretch your body farther, and he goes, keep stretching, stretch. You need to stretch more, and he's like, how much farther do I have to stretch my arm? And he would make it, to a point it hurt. He's like, I hate it for that. But it's supposed to be a strike move. And he's like, I don't see how this is a strike move. But what you're doing is the blade is inverted. So the curve is going up. So you're using the tip to strike with the tip. So that was the whole point of the move. But it's like your hand is kind of balled on the kostra. And I was like, yeah, uncomfortable as hell. And I would think that'd be a very risky move because you only have one hand on there. You're out near the kostra. If someone were to counter that really hard, that thing's going flying.
Yes.
You're not going to be able to hold it. It's coming out of your hand, for sure.
Yeah, we got a similar one in the HEMA group that we typically nickname it the grass cutter, where they basically grab the pommel of the sword and swing down, around your knees or below, trying to hit your shins. We call it the grass cutter because it looks like you're trying to cut the grass like that, like you got a big old scythe. And I actually had a friend that tried to do it to me during class one time. And I saw him load up for it because I saw him take his hand off. And I'm like, okay, as soon as I knew those fingers popped, he was coming down. And I let him throw it. And I didn't try to back up or anything else. What I did was I jumped and I palmed right on top of his head like that. And he was like, did you just Super Mario me? And I was like, yeah, I did. You know, you gotta work on not telegraphing that, because that is a dangerous move. If it works,
It is.
okay. But, you know, you're giving away almost all the control of your sword. You're overextending yourself. So it's really, it's a gamble, to say the least.
It is a total gamble when you.
I got an emergency here.
What's up?
Wyatt Birds, he was talking about asking how do you sharpen a sword. He said water bottles just bounce when I try to cut through them. Now, given that he said he just started doing this, when I first started, I filled up about 4 Pepsi 2-liter bottles and went out in the backyard and cut them. I smacked them across the backyard. I'm like, okay, well, my sword's sharp. Came back inside, cut paper, cut it just.
Edge alignment's way off.
Well,
Your edge alignment's off.
It's not so much the edge alignment; it was the angle of the cut. I was
that's your alignment, your edge alignment.
Well, I guess that counts under that, but more simply put, I was hitting it like a baseball.
Yeah,
I didn't put no angle on it. Was the problem, and that's what I wanted to tell Wyatt. Is it's all about that angle. If you come in and you smack it like a baseball to a baseball bat, you're never gonna chop your bottom. You're gonna smack it across the yard. You got to take it at an angle.
Don't hold it, Wyatt, like that, like you're holding a baseball bat. Hold it like that, like you're shaking somebody's hand, kind of. That's how you want to hold it. These fingers kind of float, but I grip with this finger and leave the thumb loose when I cut, because you want that movement. And the way I taught my wife how to cut, put the edge of the blade on your target, pull back from that point, and then come down on it. It will align your body up. It helps you get your body aligned with that edge, and then cut it.
And of course, 45-degree angle is always best. And I always say to somebody I'm teaching how to cut, I always describe to them how they cut cardboard with the razor knife. You can't take the razor knife parallel to the blade of the razor knife parallel to the cardboard and try to cut straight down. You have to angle that blade into it. And that's the same concept with cutting a bottle with a sword. You have to have an angle to it. You can't smack it at a 90-degree perpendicular angle. It just won't work. So there you go, Wyatt. Emergency solved. I hope that fixes the problem. So don't put no sandpaper to your...
Put it on the edge of the bottle. Bring it back and then cut. That'll help train your muscle memory.
I got to stop him before he goes and puts sandpaper to his blade and sharpens. It's probably not the sharpness of the blade. It's your angle of your cut, more than likely. Swords usually come sharp enough to cut water bottles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, water bottle for sure. You know, 2 liters, they're thicker and everything. 20-ounce soda bottles, they can be thicker. Water bottles, it should definitely cut. You guys covered it real well.
If you have a dull edge, you ain't doing jack to that thing.
Right. The only thing I can think of to add to what you guys said is, you know, the whole point is not to cut into the bottle. The whole point is to cut through it. So don't hit your max speed when you're trying to hit the bottle. You want to go all the way through it. Don't try to just cut to it like that. Bang, through it.
Right.
The other thing, too, is this is your cutting edge, Wyatt. Just right in here. This is your cutting range.
Yep.
It's kind of hard to see on this screen.
But
that's your cutting edge. Right in here is your cutting edge. That's what you're using.
You can say anything past the first 3 inches of the tip and the first 10 inches past the Suba or handguard.
Yeah, because the middle section would be for parrying, and the base of it's going to be for blocking.
The upper third of your sword blade that pretty much covers that area. Gary had a question, and I don't know the answer to this myself. Are Middle Eastern swords considered a separate style of swords? I'm assuming he's talking like scimitars and sitars and all those big curved, like, I don't know. But I was wondering if you guys knew, because I don't.
As far as the martial arts part, I'm not sure, but there's a lot of overlap on things like that. You know, there's the Middle Eastern Shamshur, which is very similar to, the Germans and Europeans. They had something called a messer, which was essentially a knife, and then the Grossmesser, which is a big knife. So that's kind of similar to like a slightly smaller version of a falchion. So it's a lot of simply, curved single edge blades that are kind of like a katana, but still, they're different stylistically. And it's one of those things where, Europe got into trading and battles with the Middle East for that. So they had some blend of things like that. They both had mail armor. They both had plate armor in, different stylistic ways. Middle Eastern tended to have, more mail, and they would have like the big plates in the center and stuff, but like a straight up circle rather than a breastplate.
Yeah,
But
just to protect
they're also in the desert, so they need something that breathes a little bit more. But single edge curved sword tends to function like a single edge curved sword for other things. They have different types of hilts. So Japan, we got the katana, we got the Suba on it. The Middle Eastern ones, some of them have a larger disc type guard to it, and then a round guard at the bottom that's similar to like a European rondel style knife that has the same bottom and top, but different blade to it. So it's kind of hard to say like they're exactly the same or they're not the same. But since they traded and interacted with each other, just like when firearms came to Japan, they were like, oh, this is cool. Let's take some of this, but then let's put our own spin on it. So Japan took the original Tanegashima Teppo, and they were like, wait, this doesn't work in our climates very well. We're constantly getting misfires. So they designed this little box to basically go around, the firing portion of it to help keep the moisture out. And similar sort of thing, the Europeans and the Middle Eastern, they get swords, they see swords of, similar styles, and they're like, oh, this is cool. We like this, but we're going to, put a different handle on it. We're going to have slightly different curvature to the blade. We want, different variations of it, but they're still, at the end of the day, it's a single edge curving, curved or, straight cutting type weapon. So, like you guys said before,
sure every
the same way.
And every sword has its own specific fighting style to it that goes along with it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, or at least similar ones. The European swords with, the fat blade all the way down versus the pointed ones has a different type of fighting style. Even though you could technically call them both long swords, katanas, you have variations in the blade geometry and stuff, but, you take, a Kanmuri Otoshi or a regular katana or anything else like that, and you put them in these different ruha, and they'll fight with a different katana in the same style because the blade size is, pretty much the same. The geometry is pretty much the same. There's some, you might, prefer like with a Kanmuri Otoshi, you might be favored to thrusting type attacks more often than slashing because you've got that nice fat double edge on it that's, partially sharpened along the back. But by and large, they're going to be very similar techniques, I would think.
Oh yeah, just like I was saying, all of them cross over, and it has to do with our mechanics, how we move. Mm-hmm. It's just how they do it differently. Now, here's a crazy type of swordsmanship, and it's in India. My wife came across it. These people, this stuff is insane. I forget how long the sword is.
It's a whip sword.
Yeah, have you seen that video?
Yeah.
The whip swords.
Yeah.
My God, those people are good. I mean, you hear it too.
It's like a 30-foot bandsaw blade.
Yeah.
It's not a sword.
Those things are crazy.
Yeah. You talk about dangerous. That thing come back, slice your head off, and you wouldn't even see it.
Yeah.
And they still practice it to this day.
Yeah. I've seen that video. I was like, wow, I don't want one of those.
No, me neither. Shadiversity did a video on this. Why, and I would think it would be more than just the katana. Anything that's designed kind of like a katana, single edge curve. Why is such a prolific cutter so great at than a double edged European sword? And it's because the cut keeps going. It's single edge. You can make the edge longer. Whereas if you have a double edge, the cutting edge is shorter because you have that center mass. Then it goes back into another cutting edge. So it depends on what type of sword you like. Do you want one that's really good at just straight cutting? Or do you want something where, it's going to be good at cutting, but you're going to maybe have more defense because you have more heft to it, more width, There's a lot to, the geometries of swords and what you prefer the most. Mm-hmm. It's like, I prefer the katana because I like the shape of it, the way it handles, the way it cuts. Now, would that change if I ever got a European sword? I don't know because I don't have one yet. thinking about getting one to see the
Me
differences,
too.
you know, and see what, you know, how a double-edged European sword is, you know, and how it handles and everything else. Because I know some, it looks like, I don't know, you maybe say, James, it looks like some European handles might be a little bit thinner than a katana handle. I'm not sure.
A lot like katanas, you know, it varies. There's different styles of suka, you know, with most of the modern repro swords we get, you know, your sukas, but basically straight. There's some that have kind of the hourglass, everybody calls, you know, the Hanwei, the axe handle. And European swords have a similar sort of thing, but they also have more variation in length than the katana does. They have different types of pommel, whereas, you know, katana, you know, you've got your, it's the kashira, right? The butt cap.
Yeah.
Not the kashira. So, you have a kashira, whereas on the European ones, they have a wheel pommel. They have what we call the scent stopper or the perfume bottle. They've got the fishtail. Yeah, just a lot of other varieties of the pommels. And some of those allow different things. You know, with the rounded ones, you can actually get your pinky underneath and your other finger on top for getting, you know, with the one-handed swords, completely different to how you'd be able to handle a wakizashi with one hand for that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of difference, not only in the handles for that, but also the blades themselves. And historically, you know, you would see the wider blade swords that go down that then kind of taper down like that at the point. That was in the earlier days of mail before plate became a big thing, because they were very focused a lot more on chopping and cleaving type actions, which, you know, mail didn't resist that very well because it's flexible. It's great for resisting the slash, but still, you know, if you hit me with, you know, chainmail on my arm like this with a wide bladed sword and it doesn't go through the chainmail, but it breaks my elbow, I'm having a bad day.
Oh, yeah.
But then, you know, they got to plate, and where it's like, okay, well, great. You hit me on the plate and whatever, you just, you know, rolled the edge of your sword and did basically nothing to me while leaving yourself open to a counterattack. That's when they started to taper the blade down to
make
a more
really
refined
good point.
Because they're trying to get into thrusting into the mail and everything like that.
Finding those gaps.
Exactly, finding the gaps. And that's something that Japan didn't have a lot of change to, because they didn't have the same kind of armor evolution for a lot of it that Europe did, that went through so many different phases. The samurai armor basically has three major categories of it. It's the Oyuroi at the beginning, and then the Domaru and such when they started to fight on foot. And then when firearms came in, they had the Tosei Gosoku, which tended to be, you know, solid cuirass and everything with a lot less lacing that could be put together cheaper and that would be more bullet resistant. Whereas Europe and Germany had tons of different styles and plates and everything else. They were shaping the steel to follow fashion, and there was a lot more variety. And because of that change in armor and the evolution in armor over so many centuries like that, their swords and everything else changed too. So today we might cut and be like, oh yeah, I would definitely want like a wide bladed sword like this because it cuts like a monster. Except if you're, you know, in the 15th century and you're fighting guys in plate armor, you don't want that. That sword's hundreds of years out of date, and you're going to end up getting screwed by it. So it's real cool to get caught up into like, this sword cuts so much better. I would definitely want this. But like a lot of things, you know, it's situational too. And I've cut with wide bladed swords, pointed swords. The pointed ones can often be a little bit harder once they get to the real acute point like that, because they're designed for thrusting. They're basically the opposite of a katana. They're meant to be thrusting into stuff. So they're cutting, you know, they're sacrificing the cutting, and they even have kind of a diamond shape to the blade because it stiffens it up. You can grab that sucker in the middle and really go to town on the mail. Doesn't cut tatami as well because that's not what it was designed to do.
Right.
No. And the only time really Japanese during their history where they emphasized on stabbing was during the invasion of the Mongols when they came out with the shobu, you know, with the really pronounced okisaki.
Yeah.
You know, because their armor was leather, gamisons, chainmail, so it was really thick. So the swords they had, well, one, they were breaking against their swords. They weren't very good. So they needed something where they could actually stab through some of that thick leather too. So hence the shobu was invented, you know. So a lot of tachis during that time period were a shobus. It's just they weren't really big on stabbing that much. They were more of a slash.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, because a lot of the stuff with Japanese armor, you know, your weak spots are often capitalized on by either slashing with a sword, or if you're stabbing, it's more from coming in with something like a yari where you've got a little bit of range to it. But, you know, the spots open under, the edge of the shikoro there. If you can get in right underneath of the helmet and come across, that's great to slash. If you're trying to thrust at it, it's a lot harder because you got the tari plates hanging in front. But that's covering the front. If you're trying to stab somebody sideways, things have gone horribly wrong and you're in the wrong spot. Trying to slash sideways, not really as bad because you just got to get the right angle on the sword, but trying to stab sideways, whole different thing. So their weapons were designed to combat the type of armor they had.
Yeah. And I love the design of a shobu though, because you have, it's almost like having an unabukai, where
that's my next blade.
Out the back.
That's my next blade is a shobu.
Okay.
What's that, Bird?
That's my next blade I'm getting is a shobu. That's the next blade down.
Yeah, because where they thinned it out on unabukai to make it really a prolific cutter, so no drag. On the shobu, they took the shinogi and inverted it. So as you're cutting, that drag is non-existent now. Yep. Whereas on a shinogi zakuri, that drag is right there. So you catch that drag at the end. We don't feel it most of the time, but it is slowing your blade down. Yep. So that's why it's inverted on a shobu. So it just moves fast no matter what at the same speed that you started it at, which I think was just a really smart move for that, because you have the stabbing ability with it. You have the prolific cutting with it, but then you also have the really good structural integrity as a shinogi has because of that ridge line up there. So you're almost getting the best of three worlds almost with one. Would I say it's the better of them all? No, but it's a really good durable blade. Now, you could break that tip because I don't care how well you temper it. If it takes a hard blow from something because it's so pronounced, it's going to break the tip.
Yeah.
But it's a well-designed blade for that time period.
Well, now, James, so apparently you got into katanas first. I was assuming it was the other way around. So what got you into long swords after seeing the katana?
Well, it's one of those things where, I got the ninja sword first and then the katana first, but I'd been interested in both of them from long before that, growing up watching the movies. So I watched medieval movies, I watched samurai movies, I watched ninja movies, played the video games and stuff. So I always had an interest in all of them. It's just that, the ninja sword was affordable. So that's the first one I got. And this was back in the days of like Bud K and, AWMA catalogs and stuff.
Right.
Because this was before the internet. So you weren't just, popping on and saying, hey, make me this sword. So that was a couple things I could get a hold of. And then when I was at the Ren Fair and was like, whoa, I can get one of these swords too. I was like, yeah, I would definitely want to get one of these swords. So it was not so much a question of being partial to one over the other. I always wanted all three of those types of things. It's just which one could I get my hands on first.
So are there vendors at the Ren Fair selling like Albions and stuff?
Depending on which ones you go to, like I think out there in Minnesota and a few things like that, there will be vendors for high-end swords like the Albion and the Arms and Armor. Some of the HEMA tournaments that they've had, they've actually got the vendors out there. So, one of my Albion and Arms and Armor swords I've actually bought at, one of the events like that, because you go there, you see the table, you get to handle it and kind of, I don't want to say play with it, but let's be real, play with it a little bit. Can I step over here and swing it some? And as long as nobody's around, they let you do it. So it's always nice to get a hands-on with that. But then some Ren fairs, they're selling really questionable stuff. Like the one near us has one guy that is part of his sales thing. He's got a little anvil that he sits there and he just bangs the sword on it slowly all day long to show how durable the sword is, because they're making crowbars. Like they're not making swords. They're making something that they can fool people into thinking is a sword because it looks like a sword, but it's just meant to be banged in the middle. It's not really like a sword. So Ren Fair can be good if you know what you're looking for and you know which vendors are there, because sometimes you're just going to get straight up wall hangers and that's it. But it's all a gamble of the fair and what vendors they have on any given year.
And that's nice that you can handle
apparently
it.
There's a lot of them there.
Yeah, and you can handle it like an Albion or something, so you can see if it feels good to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the thing. It's nice to be able to get a custom sword made, and you always hope when you get it,
I didn't mean
it feels good in your hands.
I didn't mean Albion specifically. It was just the only name that popped in my head. It was just
Albion's like the Rolls Royce of European swords right now.
Albion and Arms and Armor are the two most popular ones in the U.S. as far as like high tier reasonably commonly available swords without going to like pure, specialty custom makers or the guys that are charging like $3,000, $5,000, $7,000 for them. So Albion is generally called the gold standard with it. Arms and Armor is just as good, and it's great that we have both because unlike, there's like for the Eastern guys, there's Hanban and there's Rhine Sword, and they have a huge amount of overlap between them. Whereas, Albion makes a good chunk of swords, and Arms and Armor does too, but they've got like 20% overlap or something. So, Albion makes very specific swords, and they're done by going to museums, casting the originals, trying to get as close to possible as those. Arms and Armor does a very similar thing, but they're just doing it with different swords. So Arms and Armor has a 12th century long sword, but Albion doesn't. So they're good because depending on what you want to pick up, you can pick it up from one or the other. Again, with some overlap, but there's enough of a difference there that they're not really kind of, I hate to say redundant, because I've got swords from Hanban and Ryan, and I love them both. But, you can pick out almost any kind of katana, and you could get it from either one,
Oh, I got tons of Hanban. I love Hanban.
What do you mean by overlap?
Right now I have customs made by.
So
what do you mean by overlap? You mean like somebody has kind of the similar products?
So overlap, like, there's Edward the Black Prince. So Arms and Armor makes a replica of the Edward the Black Prince sword, but Albion doesn't. Albion makes a replica of the sword from the movie Arn the Knight Templar, but Arms and Armor doesn't. So taking an actual specific sword from a museum, they make a replica of that sword, which is a lot more specific than just saying like roll your own type of katana. And the customization just isn't there. It's, do you want a brown leather grip, a black leather grip, or a red? And that's kind of like all they let you do. Or sometimes do you want a brass pommel or a steel pommel? There's very little customization, but because they're trying to replicate actual museum pieces and not the same ones between them.
And that's what I heard about Albion, and I give them kudos for that they try to make it like it was. Because you don't see that very often.
No, you don't.
No.
And that's grueling because they got to make the pattern. They got to do all kinds of stuff, and that's hard to do just because, they're just taking images of it, taking pictures of it. So it's like, that's the most difficult way, because if you had the original piece, it makes it a lot easier to replicate it. So, but when you can only take images of it and then do it, that's a lot harder to do. So, and I've heard that they do a heck of a good job of it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, Albion swords are really, really good. I've won a cutting tournament. I took first place at one of them with an Albion Cressy, which is a replica of, the common Cressy war sword. So really good swords. They cut really well, really good steel. When I did that cutting with the Rhine sword Naginata on the really thin bamboo, that was like something pathetic, 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch or something that I'd actually picked up at Home Depot to try to do one of my Sashimono banner poles. And I was like, this isn't going to work because it's just bending with the weight of the flag. Like, this thing can't even hold cloth. And I cut it with that Rhine sword Naginata, and it like rolled multiple times. I was like, what is wrong with this? So, I just whipped out another sword, and it was like, chink, 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 chink. And I'm like, okay, well, the Naginata is the problem. This blade is junk. And I forget whether I picked up an Arms and Armor or an Albion, but yeah, I picked it up, and I mean, that's 5160 steel, and it just went through the bamboo like it was nothing. I'm like, okay, I do know how to cut. I'm not as dumb as I thought. But yeah, just good swords. They hold up really well. They're expensive, but it's kind of like when you get the custom $1,000 katana, what you're paying for with it, and you expect it to, hold up accordingly.
Exactly.
Well, I think you just answered the question. Joe is asking, how accurate are the Albion reproductions according to your experience and study in HEMA? And what is your opinion on Dark Sword Armory? But I think you just answered my question. Yeah, I think you did.
Dark Sword gets tossed around a lot, and they've got kind of mixed reviews on it. I don't own any of their blades myself, but what I've gathered from seeing, dozens and dozens of people posting about it is a few of the Dark Sword swords, and I don't recall which ones offhand, are actually pretty good. But even at that, sometimes it's a gamble because somebody might buy the exact same sword and get like a good version of it and a bad version. And sometimes it just comes down to like the year that they made it or the month that they made it. Like they did a pretty good job on it. And other times it gets really, half-arsed on it. So it's just not finished as well and has other little flaws to it. But I gather that there's some Dark Sword swords that are just straight up bad. Like there's no distal taper or anything else. So picture a katana where the blade is, the same thickness all the way down and the same width all the way down. You're supposed to have your taper on it. European swords are the same way too. It might start at 2.5 inches at the cross guard and end up down at 1.5. but also the thickness tapers too. It's not the same thickness all the way down. And some of the dark swords like that are more, you know, we typically call it crowbar-esque because it has no taper to it, which it makes it too blade heavy. And then, you know, you can try to offset that by putting a heavier pommel, but then the whole sword itself is too heavy. So, you know, it's trying to fix a problem by adding another problem to it. And I've heard that's happened.
That'll just tire you out real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I've heard from that. Like I said, no personal blades from them myself, but that's what I've heard, that there's a handful of them that people have been pretty happy with, but by and large, they're considered not wall hangers and not top of the line, but kind of that mid-grade where like they fall in between, like they're serviceable, you can use them, but don't expect it to be like a really good thing to try to learn anything from the manuscripts, or expect it to be what a historical sword feels like. But at the same time, you want to go, you know, hack down some tree limbs and stuff like that, you know, go ahead and go for it because, you know, it's overbuilt and everything. So it'll generally handle that.
And I got to answer Sweatpants' question here. Yes, I'm working on a festival. I'm just trying to heal my shoulder up. Give me about 3 more months, and I'm going to set that up hopefully by the end of the year. If not, spring next year. So either way. And Joe had another question here. He says, James, what was your opinion on the Ronin katana reproductions for actual use? Of course, putting price into consideration.
So would that be for the Ronin katana, like for their katanas and such, or
I think he's talking about the European. Yeah,
okay.
I think he's talking about the European style.
Those I don't have any personal experience with. I've got 1 or 2 of their Japanese swords, and they seem to be pretty good, but can't really say too much for their European type stuff. The stuff so far that comes out of Longquan like that, like I've got a Jaku medieval European style sword. For the price, it was pretty good. You know, a couple $100. It came with the sheath, it came with the belt suspension and everything. The blade itself, I kind of thought it was a watermark on the picture, but when I got it, it's actually got Jaku engraved in the blade. And I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me?
Really?
Yeah, I thought it was a watermark. I didn't pay attention. I got it and I pulled it out and I was like, are you kidding? Oh no.
Why would they do that?
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like it's not an Albion, it's not an Arms and Armor, but just like with a katana, you know, for a couple $100, it fits the bill for what it is. You know, it's good enough for that. It's good enough to cut with. It looks nice and does the part, but it's not a, you know, higher end sword. You know, I've only got one of their European style swords, so I can't speak for, you know, their whole range of it. But the one that I got for that, you know, like I said, for the price, it seems pretty good for what it is.
It doesn't kill you.
Exactly.
I think Joe has one of theirs.
Point. When you use it, it doesn't try to kill you or anybody
Right.
else.
Good point. Good point. I have some videos on that. involving naganatas and such. Yeah, Joe says I have that Jaku longsword. It's actually very strong blade, good cutter. So
yeah,
I was kind of looking at that. I think I'm more partial. I want to try Ryan sword, Ryan swords, European models. They got me impressed. If they can make a Thundercat sword, I got to try one.
And that's, you know, because I've been looking online for Euro swords, and it's hard to actually, because it's like, who do you go with for something that's going to be a starter type Euro sword? So you don't want to dump a ton of money into it, but it's going to be usable. Yeah, it's hard to find one. Do I want to
there's a lot on that?
Yeah,
I don't think the options are. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, James, but I don't think the options are there. Like to wear a katana, you can buy starter swords all day long, but I don't think it's the same for European models. I could be wrong though.
Kind of ish. I mean, a lot of the starter katanas come out of Longquan. There's a company called Depika that makes basically starter level European swords. That's down in India instead of China, but they're really not all that great. So they're going to come with kind of a janky edge sometimes. They're not really going to be made out of the best sort of thing. Like if it does have a leather wrap, it's going to be leather that was like left out in the sun and urinated on for 6 months or something. Like it feels crusty. It doesn't feel proper. It's like the difference between cotton shoestring and getting the proper Japanese silk Ito on like an actual Suka for that. So, you know, and again, for the price point, like you're more or less getting what you pay for on it. Yeah. But starting at a couple $100, there's a few good options. Cult of Athena is a pretty good website. They're essentially a reseller here in the US that sells for a bunch of different brands. And you can go on there, you can filter by price range or by, you know, general type that you're looking for, like medieval sword. There's some pretty good ones. Hanwei actually makes some fairly decent European swords for that. Cultivathena has their own brand that they're calling Bowler Arms, Balaur, I think. And a friend of mine picked one up last year. So we're going to be trying to sharpen it up and do some tatami cutting and such with it this year.
Yep.
And they tend to fall in around the $300 or $400 range, but they do come with a scabbard. And that's one of the big differences between European and Japanese swords.
Yeah.
It's a given that when you buy a katana, it's coming with a saya. A lot of European swords don't come with them. And Albion's $1,000 and doesn't come
That's
with,
what I heard.
a scabbard at all. So there's just a whole different, just different expectations on that. So the Bowler's a little more expensive, but you're getting the scabbard. So they seem to be a pretty good bang for the buck. But in the $200 to $300 range, there's a pretty fair number of them that you can get for European swords.
Yeah, I mean, because like Bert was saying, it's not
Now, have you?
a whole ton of options out there, and get a decent one. Like you were saying, you get one from India where leather's left out in the sun and everything.
Yeah, and that's specific to the Depika. There's also a brand called Windlass that makes a lot of European style swords, and they're in India as well. But their swords tend to be $200, $300, $400, and again, they're worth it for the price. They're not as bad as the Depika. So I'm picking on Depika because they're kind of the bottom of the barrel with it. But it just seems like all the Chinese type swords the Japanese type swords come from China and Longquan most of the time. A lot of the medieval European, for whatever reason, are generally coming out of India. I don't really know why, but there's a company called Museum Replicas that eventually got bought by Windlass that has been around for literal decades at this point. So just something in India. They do pretty well with the medieval European sword market for low to mid grade swords.
Oh, that's strange. Huh.
Yeah, I don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't either. Not
So
going
in
to
your
try.
so in all your HEMA competitions, what all did you do?
I did just a little bit of the unarmored type stuff. I've done a few cutting competitions. One cutting competition I ended up in just by proxy because I'd gone to that tournament to enter one of the newbie tournaments because it was my first year doing HEMA. And my teacher was in the cutting competition and the regular sword, unarmored sword competition as well. But in
Well, now
the night,
what's that? What's the unarmored? What's that?
unarmored, it's Blossfechten, so it's essentially sword fighting, similar to where you had mentioned the gambesons and such. So you're wearing a fencing mask, protective gloves, and a gambeson, and you're fighting and simulating how it would be if you didn't have armor. So hits to your gloves, they're not considered gauntlets. So essentially any hit to the body is considered valid. There's a lot of different rules and variations depending who's hosting the tournament. Like, I'd mentioned the afterblow thing. Like, you hit at the same time, you throw the points out. Sometimes it's you get 1 point for a limb and 2 points for the body. You might get 4 points if you hit the body, but also control their sword at the same time. So there's a lot of differences in the scoring. But at the end of the day, it's simulating the fighting without armor. And my teacher was doing that one, and he ended up getting cracked. I don't remember if it was his thumb or pointer or what, but he basically took a bad shot that blew out his nail, and he ended up going to the emergency room and everything. So next day, surprise, you're in the cutting tournament, and I entered that, and I got to like the final 8 of it, and I don't remember if it was 16 or 20 that was in the pool, but I walked into it of like, I don't even know the patterns on this for the 3rd round, and I got knocked out by some people. The top 4 or 5 people that qualified for that were like international gold medal winners, so there's no chance on me winning for that. But my teacher's been he started off doing Eastern martial arts before he did HEMA, so he'd been doing it for decades, and he does reasonably well in the tournaments and stuff like that. So he had pretty good expectations with it.
So what do you cut and what do they judge?
It's tatami, so it's a lot like the tameshigiri
So
that you see with the Eastern martial arts and all. For this one, the opening round is you do an overhead cut from the right, overhead cut from the left in the opening round, a rising cut from the right, rising cut from the left, horizontal from the right, horizontal from the left. And you're judged on, did the cut go all the way through? Did you do what they call scalloping? So if you do that right overhand cut and then your left overhand cut, cuts into part of that angle, they take off points for that. So they're judging not only did you get through it, did you cut cleanly? Did you get the first 3 cuts and then run out of mat? Well, that's a problem for that. So they're judging, can you complete the sequence and everything else? The 2nd or 3rd round that I got eliminated in, there's something called a crumpal, which is basically a crossing strike where you're actually crossing your arms and cutting with the back edge. I screwed that up doing on the left because they put a mat on the right and a mat on the left, and you have to do sequence like that. And they've done other stuff that you'll see in the Eastern style ones, you know, taking, they call it, I think, clipping the butterfly's wings or something. So you got a piece of tatami and you lay one across like that, and you have to be able to cut it off on the one side and cut it off on the other. Whereas your first cut can't knock it off of the top of the piece of tatami.
Yeah, Japanese, they do that too.
Yeah. So there's a lot of similar
Yeah.
stuff because you're testing cutting, and, you know, there's differences for the European style stuff. Sometimes, you know, we do the lightning cut, which is where you have to cut, you know, down, up, down like that, but you can't cut, pause, cut, pause, cut, pause. You have to do it in a fluid motion. So you have to cut, just like that. And with the katana, you have to do that, and you have to turn the sword and come back up and turn it and come back down. Yeah. Some of the European guys, you know, we didn't do this for the tournament because the rules were that you had to, you know, reverse accordingly. But with the European sword, you can cut down and cut with the false edge coming back up like that, and cut. So there's neat little stuff like that. But there's a huge amount of overlap with what it is with the Japanese style martial arts and the test cutting.
James would have fun with my toothpick challenge.
What's that?
See that video, Bird?
Oh.
My toothpick challenge?
Yeah, I had seen that. That was a while back, wasn't it?
You take, basically, you have a mask. I use beach masks because they're cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's a Tommy. Well, what you do is, this is actually what they do in tournaments in Japan. Take a toothpick and you put it in there. The whole objective is to cut it as close to the toothpick as you can without cutting the toothpick on the outside or the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just move it and you just count the threads to see how close you got. And then you just take the toothpick out, put it on the opposite side, and you cut on that side.
Yeah.
It's a challenging little thing.
I would
bet,
yeah.
So they had...
Give it a try someday.
I will, yeah.
It might be fun to do at some of your events that you do.
Yeah, it would be a fun challenge because they've had interesting challenges for some of the cutting tournaments. One, they basically put PVC uprights that were about, I don't remember if it was 6 or 8 inches apart, and you had to cut the mat, but you couldn't touch the PVC. So you had to be able to without hitting the PVC. They've done basically the body stacking. So, you know, with katana, where they used to cut the bodies of corpses, they would take tatami rolls and they would stack 3 or 4 of them vertically like this. And you got one good swing to see how many you could cut down like that. And it was, you know, total mats. And then, starting to count, you know, how many layers from it for the threads did you get through for that? They had one that I think was the favorite one I'd ever seen. They basically took a moving dolly and attached a stand to it. And they had 2 people on each side with strings, and you had to chase the tatami and cut it as they pulled it back and forth erratically. And it was both hilarious and eye-opening, like how well some people cut and how poorly some people have to can't cut because they have to prejudge their distance and everything else. So yeah, there's lots of little neat things like that to set things apart that are really cool. The toothpick thing I think would go over pretty well for one of those. Yeah,
like I said, you can't cut it on the inside neither.
Yeah.
So you have to get as close as you can without cutting either side. Toothpick.
Yeah, that would be wild.
I tried it and I did a video on it. I was like, damn, I was lucky. I got, you know how you count the where it attaches the mats together?
Mm-hmm.
I got 3 above the toothpick my first hit. And I was like, it's the first time I ever did it on a video.
Nice.
But it's because you're like, wow. You know, because it's like, no, you can't sit there and line yourself up and go back. You can be straight ahead, but then you just cut. So you can't cheat by lining yourself up first.
No, and I mean, for the people that, aren't familiar with cutting, if that's anybody, you might think you would feel the toothpick or there'd be resistance. One of the cutting tournaments I did was what they call a wheel cut, which is you cut and you immediately come back and you do a second cut. So I had to wheel cut 1, 2 from the right, 1, 2 from the left. And on the first one, I did boom, boom, fine. I came back, and from the left side, I'm right-handed. So I was like, shoot, I don't know if there's enough mat, but I got to go, whatever, whoosh. And I ended up going through. I was like, sweet, and do my little salute and bow out. And the judge came over. He's like, I want you to know we have to penalize you for that last one because you cut the peg, but that was the coolest thing we've ever seen. I cut through the 1-inch oak dowel, nothing, no resistance, just right through it. So it's
just good edge alignment.
You're not going to feel it.
No, that's good edge alignment. If you have good edge alignment, you're not going to feel it.
No, no, not at all. Like I expected to feel something, feel it
Right.
bite. Some of the times at school, the newer cutters and all, they'll end up hitting the peg and, sort of, it does get stuck in it. But yeah, you do it right. It's like butter.
I've cut my peg accidentally and didn't
You
feel
know
it.
that.
And the whole thing fell off. I was like, what just happened?
Yep.
So she had unarmed competitions, cutting, and what else did you have?
That's the two that I had done. And some of these events, they only have
Oh,
certain competitions with it. But in the whole of HEMA, one of them that I went to had essentially a five different groups that you could participate in. One was the unarmored, one was the armored, the other was the cutting. But then the other two, one was what we call ringing, which is essentially European wrestling. So basically what it sounds like, like sports wrestling, not WWF or anything like that, but following the manuscripts and doing that. And then the one that I always found interesting that I haven't seen in the Japanese martial arts, and this might just be a virtue of the fact I don't speak Japanese or can't do the translations. It's the paired tournament, which was they give you 10 different, for example, 10 different plays from two different manuscripts or whatever. And they say, here's what we're going to have. And then when you show up at the event with your partner, they say out of those 10, they're like, do these three. And you have to do it, where you and your partner are basically reenacting the play from the manuscript. They're saying, do you do actions at the same time? So they're judging how well can you replicate what we think the things in the manuscript were doing, which is, the historical value of that is really, really neat. It's not, a competition because you're not fighting each other, but they're basically evaluating to some extent, like which schools seem to be getting a better grasp of what the source material actually is. And sometimes it's not the school that ends up winning the tournament of the fight, because sometimes you can just game the rules of the fight and you can be a good fighter, but not understand the historical concepts, and, vice versa.
Well, it's too bad when you guys do the wrestling, it's not like WWE. I can see that right. You just hit him with the chair.
Yeah. I mean, it would go over a lot better if we had some
Not-
theme music and stuff, but, pyrotechnics.
It would.
For sure. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I would definitely do it if we could.
Have the girls walk around with the numbers and stuff for rounds.
Yeah.
Draw
Oh,
a hell
boy.
of a crowd.
Well, guys, I don't know. We've been on here for a couple hours. Anything you guys want to add before we close it out?
I guess just thanks for having me, guys. It's been fun. Maybe I'll be able to come back and do it again in the future. And, best of luck
Absolutely.
with the channel and everything else. I appreciate everything.
Yeah,
Right
thank you
on.
for coming on.
Sure thing. Happy
Anybody
to
who
be
ain't
here.
subbed to Samurai James, go to Samurai James. I put the link up on somewhere on the video, so I'm sure. And,
Yeah, if you like
subscribe to
Totanas,
Alex,
he's
as
got a
always.
nice collection. So,
Right. Yes, it does.
and his suit of
Yes, it does.
armor, I'm jealous.
Couple suits of armor. Yep.
Well, you got the samurai armor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, well, how many suits of medieval armor do you have? Of European armor?
I got a couple.
Just
I've
one?
got the 16th century one, which I'm keeping just because of personal attachment. Like I proposed to my wife while wearing that one. So that one's definitely going to stick around. That 1450s Italian one is the one that I told you that I'm working on getting resized. That's the one I did the cutting video, cutting the tatami in the armor. And that was really helpful because I was like, wow, what seems fine to walk around in. Like I knew it had some limitations, but until I tried cutting the tatami, I was like, wait a minute, there's a lot more going on here than I thought.
Yeah.
But part of that is just, you're ordering something from overseas. I'm trying to convert inches to metric. It was like a year and a half when I ordered it versus when I actually got to put it on, because it arrived like a month after my son was born, and I just didn't get into armor for a while. Cause like I said, I need somebody to help me get dressed. And like with a newborn, that just wasn't going to happen for a while.
Not unless you wanted your wife to kill you.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Then.
And you got plenty of sharp objects for her to do that.
Right.
Exactly.
Either I should just sell it.
That's
Cool. Congratulations on the newborn.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the newborn. Thanks for coming on. And yeah, I'd like to rerun everybody through the whole scoop again after I have all the guests on. I'll have everybody else on again. Just keep it as long as nobody gets tired of me. But yeah, either way.
Yeah, sounds
right on.
good.
We guys hang out for a minute and we say bye to everybody else.
Yes, thank you everybody in the chats for coming by and checking out the live. We appreciate it.
Yes, we do. And we'll be back with next weekend with somebody else. So we'll see you then. All right. Later on,
Take it
people.
easy.